A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, lots of us have ageing parents and grandparents. In fact, older adults are the fastest growing age demographic across the Western world, and yet there are few materials to support churches that want to help this older generation hear about God's love. Well, our special guest today has developed a resource called Hymns We Love, and it aims to fill that gap. She describes it as a gentle outreach program that uses well-loved hymns to share the good news of Jesus and key truths about God's character in an accessible way. Pippa Cramer serves on the staff of Holy Trinity Claygate, Surrey in the UK. She has responsibility for seniors ministry in her church, and in 2022 was awarded an MBE in recognition of her work with older and vulnerable people. Pippa's joining us from the UK. Hey Pippa, welcome along.
Oh, hey Neil, thank you for having me.
Pippa, many in this older generation, and I said our parents and our grandparents, have grown up singing hymns, whether at school or it's at church or in Sunday school. So what's the appeal now that our parents and grandparents are in their later years? What's so special about those hymns?
Well, as you've just said, Neil, I think the very fact that they've grown up with them, they are familiar, they're well known, they're often well loved. And I think there's something about childhood memories and just the familiar that's very, very special. We're finding actually that even people with dementia and memory problems are still able to connect with some of these well-loved familiar hymns. It's quite extraordinary, actually. I've come across many people who even struggle to find the words, if they've got dementia in the spoken word. But when they sing a hymn, oh my word, the words just flow. There's something very, very precious, I think, about music. It's one of the last things to go as memory fades. So it's just extraordinary. And as you've said, many have grown up singing them at school or Sunday school or, it's just beautiful.
Pippa, you're an occupational therapist and you're a specialist when it comes to some of these areas around ageing. What is it, do you think, in that older mind, which is so often confused, especially around, growing issues of dementia, that really those younger years' memories, they just flood back crystal clear as ever? Is this something that's just so typical with people who are going through dementia?
I don't know. I know there's a lot of research done, looking at this very thing about music, how it is. It's just an extraordinary thing that seems to kind of cut through a lot of maybe a bit of confusion and muddle. So I don't know. I don't really understand why that is, but I just think it's a beautiful thing. And I think it's so amazing to see how God connects. I don't know about you, Neil, but I find worship music so important. I have Spotify on most of the time when I'm not doing something else that I need to really focus on. And I think it's just a beautiful thing. We have a local care home, quite a few local care homes we go into actually, and there's one particular one which is particularly for people who have suffered a stroke or a brain injury. It's neurological conditions. And for a lot of those people, they're not able to communicate at all. So it's, so challenging. But again, we start singing Amazing Grace or The Lord's My Shepherd. And even if it's just random movements or just calling out noises and just smiles on faces, it is the most precious thing. And we just pray for the Lord to be touching and moving and for the Holy Spirit to be at work. And I know He is. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's an extraordinary thing.
But you'll have this experience regularly working in the ministry that you do when you're talking to someone who's suffering dementia, and you can talk to them about all sorts of things and even presentations of the gospel, and you're speaking to oftentimes a confused or a blank face. But as you say, switch on that music that they heard and loved as a child, and something just cuts through that confusion. You mentioned what's happening in the heart, the power of the Holy Spirit. Is this something, do you think, that is special about music, that God uses to be able to cut through even when that confusion is just abounding?
I really do. I really do, Neil. Yeah, it's just extraordinary to see how God moves through music, without a doubt. And there's Psalms in the Bible, aren't there? I know there's going to be a lot of music in heaven and a lot of singing. I'm pretty sure about that. And I just think it's such a wonderful thing for us to tap into whilst we're here, still on earth.
What about the thought that those old hymns are non-threatening? In fact, I think I used that word in the introduction, a gentle way of being able to communicate to that older person. How important is gentleness when you are communicating to older people, and especially those who are suffering sometimes deeper levels of dementia?
I think it's so important. Absolutely. I describe Hymns We Love, the series that we're talking about, as a very gentle resource. It's a gentle, very accessible way to share the good news of Jesus with older people, all older people. And actually, I think gentleness is so important for all of us, whatever age we are. It's accessible because I think a lot of people love to sing. As we've said, hymns are very well known and well loved, but I find the bar is quite low using hymns as a way to talk about the gospel. Certainly in my experience, Neil, I've found that, when we've tried to use a course, for want of a better word, an evangelistic course with older ones, so many people have said to me, "Oh, Pippa, no, I might not be able to concentrate for that long," or what if there's a test at the end? And even though I'll say, I promise there is no test at the end, we'd just, but no, we'd get maybe a handful, 3 or 4 people. Whereas the first time we started using Hymns We Love, looking at a particular hymn, finding out the history of the author, the key truths in that particular hymn, on average we were getting 60 people coming along. And we've chosen hymns very intentionally to talk about a different aspect of the Christian faith, and we've developed this series. But yeah, gentleness is so important. I think love and care, the welcome that people receive, all these things. There's a few ingredients, if you like, to make this series work. And gentleness, love and care, welcome, making sure that everybody feels part of it and special is so important. And of course, the top thing is prayer. This whole resource has been absolutely saturated in prayer for years. And I am in awe at how God has led us to the point where we are now, where it's available for people in Australia as well as in the UK and the US. We sing hymns all over the world, of course, don't we? Not just in the UK.
That's right, and there's a lot of people, even young people, who have a growing appreciation for older hymns. In fact, the very first fleet that arrived in Australia, and given that you're in the UK, you might appreciate that when you think of us Aussies down under in a colony. But some of those same hymns that were sung on the first fleet are some of those favourite hymns that are being sung today, and they'll go on generations beyond us if Jesus doesn't return in that time. Let me just stay with this thought of music for a moment, because is there an attitude adjustment sometimes we need to have as our parents and our grandparents reach those golden years and sometimes affected by dementia? Whereas we might think a contemporary driving beat, you might be part of the rock generation or a disco generation or whatever it might be, but that's not necessarily the way you communicate with an ageing person. How do you think about our attitudes and what needs to change?
I think there's a place for both, without a doubt. I think some of these old hymns, my goodness, the words they're just incredible. They're like a sort of almost a mini sermon in each hymn. And often I think when you find out the history behind them, the circumstances that the person that's written the hymn was going through, for example, they're incredibly powerful. But there's such a place for both. As I said earlier, I adore all the more modern worship songs. But there are lots of very key truths, I would say, in some of these hymns where you've got different verses. It's perhaps longer than some of the other ones, which are a bit shorter these days.
What's going through your mind, Pippa, so far as which hymns are outstanding for you that really cut through and older people just love them? Which ones have you got in mind?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I mean, there are so many, but I think probably the one that I use the most when I'm visiting older people in their homes, particularly maybe coming towards the end of their life, and that's "The Lord's My Shepherd," based on Psalm 23. That one, people just resonate so well with. They remember it. They might know the psalm if they've grown up in a Christian household. And I just think that connects in the most extraordinary ways. Another one, actually, I'm just thinking about, which is part of our series, is Rock of Ages. Perhaps not as well known as "The Lord's My Shepherd," but I'm just thinking of one chap, I'll call him John, who wasn't a Christian initially, was visiting actually his wife's grave in the churchyard at our church, and it happened to be on a Tuesday morning, which is when we run our big group. It's one of the largest groups now for seniors in the UK. It's called Connections. And one of my team saw him outside and just sort of said hello and said, "Would you like to come in for a coffee?" And he was very, very hesitant. He was grieving. He was, he'd just lost his wife. The next week he came back on that Tuesday morning and she saw him again. And he tiptoed in and he sort of, I think he had a quick coffee and then he scuttled out again. And then anyway, this happened for a few weeks. He started to come along and was welcomed and loved and cared for. And Connections is a great name. It's about connecting old friends, new friends, and hopefully connecting people with the Lord as well. He just became really part of things. During the lockdown, that's a whole nother story, how we had to care for so many people in their homes. But I remember giving him one of these, those little handheld crosses. And that was one of the things we gave out during the lockdown. But when it was about 6 months ago, he had cancer, he was dying. And I would visit him at home, and he used to always have his little cross next to him, and he'd want to hold on to it when we'd pray together, which was so lovely. And he told me, Pippa, it was, because he then did Hymns We Love with us as well. It was the hymn Rock of Ages was what really helped him understand why Jesus had to die, the importance and the significance of the cross. He loved that cross. Anyway, he then did die a few, I think it was about a week later he died. And as I was visiting his daughter, who was, she was in tears, I was too. And I said, she wasn't a Christian actually, but I said, you might find that holding Dad's little cross, that lovely little wooden cross he loved so much, that might be of comfort to you. And she said, "Oh, no, Pippa. No, Dad wanted that cross with him. He held on to that cross as he passed from life to death." And she said, no, but she said, "Don't worry though. You gave him another one," and I'd forgotten that. And she said, I've got the other one, and I'm beginning to talk to God and beginning to pray myself." But it was extraordinary, Neil, because even in the funeral, he wanted that little cross apparently in the coffin. But the significance of that is just amazing. There's so, and I remember before he died as well, he said, "I'm no longer frightened of dying. I used to be terrified of dying." And I think, that was just so significant. And I think, this generation, there's a sense of urgency. They need to be given the opportunity to hear the good news of Jesus before they die, because time may be short. And yeah, it just breaks my heart to think of people not being given the opportunity.
And it's more than just sentimentalism. This is really the way that you connect with the creator of all things. And his promise of life really comes in understanding, especially that mission and that message of the cross. Now, your series is called Hymns We Love, and there's 5 video sessions. Each one tells the story of a hymn writer and how the hymn writer wrote the hymn, what it all means, and the message behind it. How do you describe the way these hymns communicate such beautiful things when they've got the story behind them?
Absolutely. I'm thinking of Amazing Grace, actually, and John Newton's extraordinary story. When you actually think about who he was before he found God, twice, actually. He went, the slave trader, the awful, terrible things he did, and yet he came to find and came to know the Lord. It's just an extraordinary story. And I think, in actual fact, we filmed that particular video up in Olney. It's a little village in Bedfordshire in the UK, where John Newton ended up becoming a vicar, a priest. And I just kept wanting to cry when I was there. It was so amazing filming and just seeing his grave, and it was extraordinary. I think the stories behind these hymns are quite remarkable. And Steve, my husband, who actually gives the talks, he has written the actual talks. He talks very much about the prodigal son, and links that in. And grace. We are so undeserving, and yet God lavishes us with his extraordinary, amazing grace. It truly is amazing.
And special meaning too for Aussies, because it was John Newton who was a part of that friendship group with Wilberforce and William Pitt, who was the Prime Minister at the time, who chose the chaplain, Richard Johnson, to come to Australia and make Australia an outpost for getting the gospel into the South Pacific. So amazing to connect with Amazing Grace. We're talking about getting old or having older parents, perhaps ageing grandparents, and ways in which you can gently teach or preach the gospel. And there's lots of dimensions to what we're talking about today as we discuss a series called Hymns We Love. Pippa Cramer serves on the staff at Holy Trinity Claygate, Surrey in the UK. We're talking to Pippa from the UK. She has the responsibility for the seniors ministry in her church, and in 2022 was awarded an MBE in recognition of her work with older and vulnerable people. Pippa, let me ask you about those who are growing old, those who are suffering different levels of dementia, but there's this other really prevalent issue that so many will be aware of with people who are growing old, and that is the issue of loneliness. What about loneliness and how hymns have a real role to play in helping to alleviate some of the pain and hurt from that?
Absolutely, Neil. I think loneliness and isolation is absolutely huge. It's always been around. We became so much more aware of it, didn't we, during the pandemic, when people were having to stay at home if they were older or vulnerable. But I think it's still there. I think, as a society, ageism is a big, big thing. And often it doesn't get spoken about. That just breaks my heart. I don't know whether it's because a lot of older people maybe aren't seen as much, and they're not able to go on social media to sort of stand up for their rights or whatever it is. They are often behind closed doors, and they're not seen, and perhaps they feel a bit invisible. And I can't bear this. It's actually what wakes me up very, very early every morning to pray for this generation. And I feel and I think that we as a church have such an opportunity to reach this generation. I'm thinking back to even, in Matthew 22, when Jesus is asked by a Pharisee who's trying to trick him, and he's asked, what is the greatest commandment? And of course, the first is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind. But the second is to love your neighbour. And I sometimes think, well, who are our neighbours? Our neighbours are all the people around us. But I think as we're all living longer, a lot of our neighbours will tend to be older. So we've got a job to reach out to them, to know who our neighbours are, and to perhaps connect with them, or connect with older relatives, aunts or uncles. And I think, again, going back to Hymns We Love, as you've just said, this is a wonderful way of either inviting people to a little group at church or a small group, or perhaps take hymns we love. You can take it to somebody at home, even somebody that's maybe now confined to home, maybe their sitting room or even their bed. You can watch hymns we love on an iPad, or you can. It's very versatile. You don't have to use the videos. You could just talk a little bit about one part of the script, if you like, and perhaps play Amazing Grace or How Great Thou Art on Spotify. So I think we have a wonderful opportunity.
Pippa, the last of the baby boomers, which was a large generation, are turning 60 this year. There is a sense, isn't there, when you think of mission, you think of, overseas mission, cross-cultural mission. But do you think that baby boomers, and let's not age those who are just turning 60 this year too prematurely. I know that lots of baby boomers still think of themselves as young, but that particular age group, it's a little bit like a big mission field, isn't it? Because so many have not responded to the gospel, this proclamation of salvation by God's grace through Jesus Christ. It is like a mission field.
Absolutely. It really, really is. And I'm not that far away from 50, I have to confess. And I certainly think that, those of us in our 50s, even and 40s, actually, I still grew up at school singing. I sang a hymn every morning in assembly. Perhaps if you're 20 or a teenager, maybe that isn't the case anymore. But we've got a really good opportunity to use something, I think, that we are familiar with and that we have grown up with. Definitely baby boomers, without a doubt. Most, I would say, and the carols at Christmas. I'm just thinking of Hark the Herald Angels Sing. Most people know that, don't they? And that's one of our introductory sessions, actually. So yeah, it's a great opportunity.
Your series is called Hymns We Love, and as you say, it's quite versatile because not only is it these great hymns like Rock of Ages and Amazing Grace, but those special times in the year. And you mentioned Christmas time. What about Easter? And there might be other times through the year where there are particular hymns that come to mind. Any thoughts around that sort of versatility in this series?
Yes, absolutely. Well, certainly in my experience, sometimes older people don't want to sign up for a course, as I mentioned earlier, but they might come along to a one-off session at Christmas to discover more about Hark the Herald Angels Sing, who wrote it, for example. And I think if there's mulled wine and a mince pie on offer, yes, you could make a lovely session and invite people just to that one session. Similarly, at Easter, we've got Thine Be the Glory, that incredible hymn. Again, coffee and, I was going to say mince pies again. No, hot cross buns. You have hot cross buns in Australia, don't you?
We do, yes.
Yes, you do. I love hot cross buns. But to be able to invite somebody to that and explore a bit more about what that hymn means. The other is great. So that's another of our introductory sessions. The other one we've got is one that you could use at any time of the year. And that is the beautiful hymn, My Song is Love Unknown. That is such a precious, beautiful one. And again, you could use that whenever. And the beauty of these 3 introductory sessions are that you could invite people along and then say, gosh, if you enjoyed that, would you like to come? We've got 5 more, actually. Would you like to come to a session, a short series to find out about more of your favourite hymns? And we're finding that that's a lovely way in. One initially. Oh yes, I might be brave enough to come along to one, and then hopefully they will enjoy it. Again, things like the welcome, generosity, making sure people aren't on their own as they arrive, all that kind of stuff is so, so important. And as part of the Hymns We Love package, if you like, the Leaders Kit, there's a handbook touching on all these things about building a team, which is so important, getting the atmosphere right, refreshments appropriate for the setting, all those sorts of things. But yeah, Christmas and Easter are a really great great opportunity to invite people and then bring them on again.
We'll often think Christmas or Easter might be an outreach opportunity. What about wartime hymns? Is this another? I mean, there's obviously going to be different times through the year where there's remembrance days. In Australia, we have Anzac Day, and oftentimes you'll hear hymns like Abide With Me. Some of those songs, they are there and they are timeless, and it doesn't matter who is at those gatherings. There are people in different ages, and the oldest through the youngest get to be exposed to wonderful old hymns. That's another outreach opportunity in some sense, isn't it?
It really is. And that's a really, really good point. Neil, we haven't actually got, we haven't had a focus on that yet, but maybe that's for another time. I mean, we have got another 10 hymns ready to be produced into the next 2 series. And carols. Do you know carols? I'm just thinking we could have carols we love, couldn't we? And I think that will hit a lot of younger people too, actually, because we've all grown up with carols at Christmas.
What about people who are incarcerated, prisoners? Because a lot of people have a prison in their community. There's a lot of people who are involved in some levels of prison chaplaincy or supporting prison chaplaincy. The value of hymns for prisoners, is this something you've been across?
It is. The way, honestly, I am in awe at how God is moving with using this resource, actually. Absolutely. There are older prisoners. I think people tend to think, they generalise and maybe think it's for younger people, but actually, of course, there are going to be older prisoners. And in fact, we have been approached by the advisor to the chaplains in the UK, the Church of England, and they are really keen to start piloting using Hymns We Love in 2 of our bigger prisons in the UK. One is hoping to use it, but the chaplain is hoping to use it in smaller groups or maybe bigger groups. The other prison has got some in-cell technology where the prisoners can actually watch certain things that are allowed on their screens in their cells, which to me seems makes me want to cry at the thought of people in individual cells being able to be given this opportunity. Again, going back to Amazing Grace, grace, how people need to hear that. So, I'd love your listeners to pray for that if they would, and pray for prisoners, because my goodness, they need to hear the good news too, don't they?
Well, so prisoners, there are people who are in aged care. There are a lot of people who suffer loneliness, even levels of dementia, who are living at home and they are being cared for. There are all sorts of people coming in to care for them. And as family, we have an opportunity to introduce a resource like this series we're talking about today called Hymns We Love. Let me ask you here, Pippa, do you have to have special training to be able to use this series? I mean, you mentioned it's a video series. Do you have to be, the pastor or some sort of special leader to be able to run this? Who gets to run Hymns We Love?
Thank you so much for asking me that, Neil. Yeah, absolutely. You do not need to be a pastor or a vicar or a leader, a Bible scholar. Absolutely not. I would say if you love Jesus, if you have a heart for people, maybe especially for older people, then you are more than qualified to bring a video on your iPad or your laptop along to your grandparent or your great uncle or whoever it is, or a neighbour next door. We're finding that people sometimes are just loving having this resource because actually maybe they've run out of things to keep talking about, when you visit an elderly relative. But this is a new thing to bring in with you, and you can chat about Charles Wesley's hymn, And Can It Be, or whichever hymn you happen to look at. I mean, it might be worth me just saying at this point, just for listeners to know, Hymns We Love on the video, it's beautifully shot. It's all as I mentioned John Newton earlier, but all of the sessions are filmed in a beautiful historic English country church. So the setting is visually very lovely to watch. shots of the countryside, sheep, it's beautiful, really, really beautiful. I do the little introduction, explain what we're going to be doing, looking at today. I then interview an older person for whom that particular hymn means something very special. So I'm just thinking, for the Lord's my shepherd, I interview a dear lady called Jean, who has had cancer. And for her, the Lord's my shepherd was like spiritual medicine for her. In the middle of the night, when she was in terrible pain, she would recite the words, she would hum the tune, and it was literally what got her through. We then sing the hymn all together. You've got the words on the screen. There's a congregation singing it. And then Steve, my husband, gives the short talk, which is not too long. It's about 10, 12 minutes, interspersed with shots of different things relative to relating to the talk. And then we sing the hymn again, because it's quite helpful to sing it again, just to reflect again on the words that you've just been talking about. And then I do a sum up, and then I finish with a prayer as well. And it's all aimed at the person that's watching it. And then say how excited we are to see you next time when we're going to be singing Amazing Grace or whatever it is. So that's the video. It's about half an hour in length. It's not too long. And it's there, ready for you to go. So no, you don't need to be a vicar.
And you've got this combination of the old and the new. It's old, obviously, when you're talking about those historic hymns, but it's new because in most cases today, people are accessing that on their new big screen TV with a wonderful sound system. And as you describe it, a beautiful production. So you've got the best of everything in here. All of those old memories combined with the new technology and creating an opportunity for people to come to faith in Christ. Let's talk evangelism for just a moment here, because you've learned lots about reaching out to older people. What's that done for your own relationship with God? Your own, in one sense, a call in the ministry that you're in. What has it done for you to see those older people and people with dementia light up when you put on these hymns?
Light bulb moments, I would say. Oh my word. I would say over the last, I've been working in the job that I'm doing with our local church for about 12, 13 years now. But since, Hymns We Love, it's just been amazing. It's hard to put into words, Neil. I find myself just sitting with the Lord and just worshipping him more and more, because I just find him so extraordinary and so amazing. He truly is great and wonderful, and the way he has used this resource to reach people has been amazing. I as I've said, I'm in awe of him, and it's the biggest privilege. I find myself often crying as I pray. I know prayer is the key. In fact, I remember it was in January 2020, excuse me, before the pandemic hit us. I just felt I needed to go away specifically to pray even more for this generation. So I went away. Some friends of mine had a little cottage down by the sea in the south coast of the UK, and I went away for 4 days, really just to pray. And each time I sat down, I remember the first morning I arrived and I sat down. I was so excited, I'm going to pray. And then I found all I could do was cry. I was sobbing, and I was just thinking, oh my goodness, what is this? And I thought, and I remember I just rang my mum actually, and I said, this is ridiculous. I've come here to pray, and all I can seem to do is cry. And I'll never forget what she said. She said, darling, just go with it. So I did. I prayed and I cried for 4 days. Still makes me want to cry. The Lord was doing, other than I didn't know the pandemic was about to hit. I didn't know we did all sorts of things in the pandemic. And in fact, Hymns We Love is on a national phone line that we set up with the Archbishop of Canterbury at the beginning of the first lockdown. And Hymns We Love is on the phone line. And I found myself praying. And as I was praying and crying, I just knew what the big vision was. And it was and it's a bit of a bold vision, Neil. I was almost a bit embarrassed to tell people when I got back home, but I knew what it was. And my prayer was and still is for hundreds of thousands of older people across the world to be given the opportunity to hear the good news of Jesus before the end of their lives, and just to discover how amazing he is. And that is our prayer. It's all now in the Hymns We Love handbook. And so this opportunity, I can't thank you enough for speaking with me this morning in Down Under in Australia, because you sing hymns too, and your older people listening, their grannies and their grandpas and their aunts and their uncles, they know these hymns, and it's a way of connecting with them that is so powerful, and it makes me want to cry just thinking about it.
And Pippa, you've been recognised for your service to seniors, awarded an MBE, and we might say congratulations. We don't have MBEs in Australia, but we know that's a pretty special award where you are in the UK. Let me tell listeners how they can get a hold of this series. And so you might want to reach for a pen or a pencil. The website, thegoodbookcompany.com.au. That's the place where you can access the series we're talking about today. The series is called Hymns We Love. Thegoodbookcompany.com.au, and there is, in fact, a sample first session you can access for free. So it's a little bit like try before you buy, but do access that, thegoodbookcompany.com.au. And you can follow Pippa on Twitter. You could also order the kit on Amazon. But the place to get that right now and to access that sample first session free is thegoodbookcompany.com.au. Pippa Cramer, I want to thank you so much for taking some time to share your heart and tell us all about your great new resource, Hymns We Love. No doubt people will be anxious to get a hold of the first series and knowing that there's more series to follow. Thanks so much for sharing these things with listeners today on 2020.
Thank you so much, Neil, for having me. And I'd love to assure all listeners that I'm praying for them as they listen and as they hopefully reach out to older people around them. I'm really all praying in the UK here. So thank you.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.